Alas, the times are such that those who are considered leaders and stalwarts of society are more viciously inimical to God than others. Therefore, what devotional service for Lord Vishnu's satisfaction can they perform? And if they cannot perform devotional service, then how will they gain release from their innumerable sins? If the stalwarts of society are not willing to declare that Lord Vishnu is the omnipresent absolute truth, and that he is all-pervasive due to his being both a person as well as formless, then what can the lesser man, the man on the street, understand about this esoteric subject matter? The Supreme Lord is the sole proprietor of everything. We cannot take the position of the enjoyer and proprietor of this material world. Whatever the Supreme Lord mercifully gives us as his remnants, that alone we should we accept. We must never desire another's property. As the Upanishad states, everything animate or inanimate that is within the universe is controlled and owned by the Lord. One should therefore accept only those things necessary for himself, which are set aside as his quota, and one should not accept other things, knowing well to whom they belong. Only when the leaders of society center all their activities on the Supreme Lord will these activities bring good fortune and benediction to the leaders themselves, as well as to their followers. But if the leaders avoid performing their activities for Lord Vishnu and instead pose as Lord Vishnu themselves, taking worship, wealth, and praise from their followers and returning the same to them as remnants, then others might become attracted by their pretentious renunciation and thus follow their path to doom. But nothing further will be achieved. Such leaders uselessly excite their ignorant sycophants, inducing them to perform many sinful activities. In this way, such selfish leaders bring about their followers' doom, simply to increase their own distinction, adoration, and wealth. Unfortunately, the leaders do not know that these minuscule portions of distinction, adoration, and wealth will be burned to ashes at their death. But sinful methods used to acquire these temporary material advantages will beget results, which will then very subtly mix with their subtle body, namely mind, intelligence, and false ego. And these results will later become the seeds of further sinful activities, which will entangle the soul in the cycle of karmic reaction. Birth after birth, forcing him to go through many different species of life. So this is a very interesting point. This is the cycle of karmic reaction, and this begs a little bit of explanation. Not that it's esoteric in any way, but it's a very interesting point. The sinful methods used to acquire temporary material advantages will beget or will lead to results which will then very subtly mix with the subtle body of the person, namely the mind, intelligence, and false ego. And these results will later become the seeds of further sinful activities, which will entangle the soul in the cycle of karmic reactions, birth after birth, forcing him through many different species of life. So this is one of those, it's a description of a slippery slope down to repeated birth and death. If we use sinful methods to acquire some temporary material advantages, then these the results of those sinful activities mix with the subtle body, namely the mind, intelligence, false ego. In other words, we have some kind of a chemical reaction that takes place where we imbibe the virus of sin, into the very fiber of our subtle body, the mind, intelligence, and false ego. And these results will later become seeds of further sinful activities. So it's, in other words, it's a virus. Once you catch the virus, and if you have a low immune system, then the virus takes stronghold, takes over, and a person gets violently sick. But this sickness is almost incurable as long as a person continues in material activities. So they get more and more entangled in the cycle of karmic reactions, birth after birth. And they're forced to take many different species of life, reincarnate into many different species of life. So this is the cycle of karmic reaction. So everything in creation goes from subtle to gross. And everything in concerning karma goes from gross to subtle. And Prabhupada explains this more in the 6th chapter, where he's talking about the mind. And he says, the purpose of the yoga system is to control the mind and to draw it away from attachment to sense objects. It is stressed herein that the mind must be so trained that it can deliver the conditioned soul from the mire or the contamination of ignorance. In material existence, one is subjected to the influence of the mind and the senses. In fact, in other words, he's saying one is subject, the one is referring to the soul. The soul is subjected to the influence of the mind and the senses. In fact, the pure soul is entangled in the material world because the mind is involved with the false ego, which desires to lord it over material nature. So, to understand the cycle of karmic reaction, it begins by employing sinful methods to acquire temporary material advantages. Well, there are many examples of this. Like, for example, there was a lady working for the IRS, and she was in the collection department. She collects the money from people who are been fined for IRS, in other words, not correctly reporting their taxes, trying to cheat on them. So she was she was in the receiving end of the money, and she had something to do with putting the money in the right bank accounts of the IRS. Well, she was fiddling with the books, let's say, and she embezzled hundreds and thousands of dollars, but always in little amounts, not one big amount, small amounts over 5 to 10 years. But eventually, they caught up with her. Right? Now, she was a trusted person in the IRS, right? They vet the person very carefully before they let them handle the money like that. Well, she got caught. And she's one of these little old sweet ladies, right? You would never imagine that she would do such a thing. And they seized all her assets, and they put her in jail. So, as soon as we begin to use some sinful methods to acquire a temporary material advantage, the result of that is those acts and the mentality that one evolves to do acts like that subtly mixes with the subtle body, meaning the mind, intelligence, and the false ego. And it engenders seeds of further sinful activities. and usually progressively sinful activities, which entangles a person in a cycle of karmic reactions, birth after birth, and forcing one to go through many different species of life. So the whole point of Krishna consciousness is to stop one before they begin the cycle of sinful activity to get material advantage. So this lady, she began stealing very small amounts, and then she started buying nice things, and then she became a little more brazen and daring and reckless as time went on. And she got addicted to taking the money and spending it and buying nice things for herself. So that affects the subtle body, meaning the mind, intelligence, and false ego, and then there's no controlling it after that. And eventually one gets caught. It is stressed herein that the mind must be so trained that it can deliver the conditioned soul from the contamination of ignorance. In material existence, one is subjected to the influence of the mind and senses. In fact, the pure soul is entangled in the material world because the mind is involved with the false ego, which desires to lord it over material nature. Therefore, the mind should be trained so that it will not be attracted by the glitter of material nature, and in this way, the conditioned soul may be saved. One should not degrade oneself by attraction to sense objects. The more one is attracted by sense objects, the more one becomes entangled in material existence. So that's a law of nature. The more one is attracted by sense objects, the more one becomes entangled in material existence. The best way to disentangle oneself is to always engage the mind in Krishna consciousness. And one must do this. It's not, let's say, optional. One must do this. Just like today, the FBI made public information that they've been keeping secret for about 2 years. That is, one of, not the CIA. The CIA made public something that they kept secret for 2 years. Apparently 2 years ago, one of their CIA counterintelligence agents, a woman, was in charge of monitoring the activity of one particular ISIL terrorist. He was a person born in England who was a rapper before. And then he joined ISIS, went to Syria, and was fighting in Syria. So he speaks very good English, and he's a very clever person. He's a rapper, right? So he sings all those. It's not really singing, but he talks all that nonsense and makes money by talking nonsense. Anyway, she had all the secret information about him that they pick up on satellites and through spies. Right? So she knew a lot about him. And I guess she was in some kind of email contact pretending to be some, brainless American woman interested in Muslim revolutionaries, right, or Muslim terrorists. So he was conversing with her, thinking that she was just an ordinary stupid American, and he convinced her to leave the United States, come to Syria, and marry him. And she's an FBI agent, right? And she was in charge of monitoring him, right? So you see, he really wrapped his way around her brain. And then once she gets there, after a short while, she realizes that she made a huge mistake. It's extremely dangerous. And she was very, very badly treated because they're not sure if she's for real or she's a double agent playing both sides. So then she turned on him and started somehow or other communicating information to the United States, to the FBI. And eventually she escaped, and then she was tried for treason because she gave FBI secrets to the enemy, right? And but because she helped the FBI also, in the end, they reduced her sentence, from, life in prison to, I don't know, some ridiculous thing like 2 months in prison or something. So it's a very strange story. Was she a double agent? Nobody really knows, but apparently she was convinced, or she fell in love with him, this terrorist, and went all the way to Syria secretly, ratted on the CIA and the United States intelligence agencies, and then realized she made a big mistake and turned on ISIL. But in the meantime, she revealed many, many secrets about American espionage. So you see, as soon as a person gets on that slippery slope of doing, let's say, venal sins. Venal sins means little sins for sense gratification, right? Or in other words, it says that using sinful methods to acquire temporary material advantages, right? And then that begets results, and the results then subtly mix with the subtle body, namely the mind, intelligence, and false ego. And these results will later become the seeds of further sinful activities, which will entangle the soul in the cycle of karmic reactions, birth after birth. So this is just like, for example, a person is in junior high school, and in junior high school someone tells them, how wonderful it is to smoke marijuana. So they try to smoke marijuana with some friends who get it somehow or other, and they have a great time, and they're laughing and giggling and so many things. And then there's another marijuana party, and then there's another one, and pretty soon the person gets hooked on smoking marijuana, right? And then along with it, so many other things. So gradually they become completely, let's say, involved in that culture, subculture of smoking marijuana, and then sex and all the other things. So it begins with a small little gesture, but then because a person is not trained in spiritual knowledge, it becomes irresistible because it's a means of social integration into a group where there's a group identity, there's camaraderie, and so forth. And eventually, a person gets completely trapped. Same thing happens in India. Nowadays, people think it's a very wonderful thing to drink a little bit of alcohol, right? I remember, this is something I never saw before. One time, when I first went to India, I never saw anything like this, but after some years, I was in an Indian ticket office, airline ticket office, and the ticket agent, he had his own business, and he was sitting behind his desk, and he was trying to arrange a ticket for me, but it was taking a long time, so he had me wait a little bit. And then some other customers came, and it was a typical Indian family from Uttar Pradesh, right? They were not particularly rich or anything, but they came to buy some tickets, and he had them sit down around his desk, and there was the two wives and two husbands, and they're talking, and he pulls out a whole tray of whiskey, 3 or 4 bottles of whiskey, right, and then pours, and gives it to the men, and the men take it, and he virtually forced the women also, although they kept saying no, 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 but they finally took it, and they all drank. So you see how it becomes socially, let's say, either in the beginning you might be embarrassed into doing it, but then later on it becomes a habit and it leads to many other things. So this is called the cycle of karmic reaction. So it says, the more one is attracted by sense objects, the more one becomes entangled in material existence. The best way to disentangle oneself is to always engage the mind in Krishna consciousness. Well, how to engage the mind in Krishna consciousness? Well, first of all, we should understand that the mind is the cause of bondage, and the mind can be the cause of liberation. The mind absorbed in sense objects is the cause of bondage, and the mind detached from sense objects is the cause of liberation. So therefore the mind that's always engaged in Krishna consciousness is the cause of supreme liberation. So Krishna consciousness is all about using the mind, intelligence, and all facilities that we have to render favorable service to Krishna. Favorable service means we offer Krishna what he likes. Not what we like, but what he likes. And if we do that continually, then eventually we lose all attraction to material, let's say, personal aggrandizement. Rather, we use things in the service of Krishna. Personal aggrandizement, the personal collection of things for sense gratification, entangles one more and more in material life. But the same things used in Krishna's service liberates one. And one is never bereft of anything when they use everything in Krishna's service, because Krishna always gives back in the form of prasadam. So it's a very nice system. One becomes purified, one remains active, and one's consciousness becomes very peaceful by engaging in Krishna consciousness, and thus one avoids all sinful activities. How to cure the material disease is the next title. The general populace simply follows the dictates and decisions of the leaders who are bereft of any spiritual realization. Therefore, it is advised that the leaders of society should act responsibly. The easy path to prosperity opens up when these leaders intelligently put into practice the precepts of karma yoga. Karma yoga, there's false karma yoga and real karma yoga. False karma yoga is acting ostensibly in devotion, but with the desire to enjoy the results personally at the end. And real karma yoga is to offer the result of one's activity to Krishna, and if Krishna offers something back, to distribute it to others. So basically that's what we're doing here. We receive different donations, and whatever we receive, we use it in Krishna's service. Therefore we have free prasadam every day for anyone that comes to the temple. We decorate the deities every day with fresh garlands, nice clothing, and offering prasadam 6 times a day to the deities, and then distributing that to the public. We have so many free courses people can take, and so many advantages to having a temple where the goal is not to make money. The goal is to use everything in Krishna's service. So it helps many people, and it purifies the mind of all the subtle desires for making it some permanent place for ourselves in the material world. The only permanent place you can get, well, that's not even permanent, is a grave, but even the graves are not permanent. Huh?
You will rent or lease it for 13 years, right? After that they dig you out and
They can, yeah. They can. Yeah. Okay, so the easy path to prosperity opens up when these leaders intelligently put into practice the precepts of Karma Yoga. Without first becoming adept at curing one's own disease, why try to treat many other patients? This is unreasonable. Therefore, there's a famous saying by Socrates, by either Socrates or Plato, I forget. Physician, heal thyself. You know, so if you go to a doctor, you say, "Doctor, I think I have cancer." He said, "You have you have cancer." All of a sudden, you get scared. You know. Yes, sir, but I have an appointment. I have to go somewhere else. Excuse me. You know. Yeah, I mean, physician, heal thyself first. There's one physician, he's a cancer physician, right? So this one lady came, she was diagnosed with cancer, and he was her doctor, right? He was advising her what to do. But before she was cured, he died of cancer. So this is the dilemma today, right? Therefore, 2,500 years ago, Socrates says, "Physician, heal thyself." Because if he can heal himself, then maybe he can heal somebody else. Even then, even if he heals himself, I'm not sure he can heal everyone else. But at least he has some experience. The last thing you want is a doctor who has plenty of theoretical knowledge, but no practical experience. That would be a catastrophe. Right? First, the leader has to adopt the principles of Karma Yoga in his own life. Then he has to diagnose the disease of the people. Then the medicine is to be prescribed and a proper diet given. Simply to offer the suffering people a sense-gratificatory cure that titillates their senses, this is not going to make them healthy. Rather, this will spread the disease further, and at one stage, the doctor himself will be infected and finally die from it. So how many doctors have treated Ebola? Huh? They're not, none live to testify, right? Yeah. Well, a few may have avoided getting it, but a whole bunch of them died treating the Ebola patients in Africa. So you see, they also succumb to the same thing. They have to have, a very good immune system themselves to be able to avoid catching it. Rather, this will spread the disease further. But if the doctors don't give a proper diet and medicine, proper diet is prasadam, medicine is chanting Hare Krishna. Simply to offer the suffering people a sense-gratificatory cure that titillates their senses, this is not going to make them healthy. Yeah, so nowadays, someone comes to the doctor and says, "Oh, doctor, I'm very depressed." Doctor says, "All right, what's the matter?" I say, "My relationship with my husband is not going well." I said, "Oh, okay, well, you can have sex with me, I'll make you happy." That's happened many times. No, I'm not kidding you. It's happened many times. In fact, there was even one devotee who was doing marriage counseling in Washington, D.C. He's got a PhD. And different devotee women were going to him for counseling, because they're having problems in their marriage. And he ended up getting into sexual relationships with these women. And he's a devotee and a PhD. Right? So, do those two titles mean anything? A devotee and a PhD in psychotherapy? It means absolutely nothing if he has no control of his own senses and mind. How is he going to help anybody else? He just makes other people miserable. Forgetfulness of the Supreme Lord Vishnu is human society's real and original disease. So, if one does not treat this ailment, but instead shows insincere and shallow concern for the patients, one might give them some momentary relief and pleasure, but ultimately such a course of action cannot cure them permanently. If the patient goes for proper medicine and diet, but is instead administered bad medicine and diet, then he is certainly in the jaws of death. So one time Prabhupada was a little boy, he was sick, his father took him to the doctor. It's in Calcutta, maybe. Prabhupada was born in 1896, so let's say it must have been like 8 to 10 years old. So 1906, right? What did the doctor recommend? Chicken soup. Recommended chicken soup. So his father didn't like that. So he comes home and he tells his wife, Prabhupada's mother, and Prabhupada's mother said, well, we must make chicken soup for him. I'll go buy some chicken. The father said, wait a minute, I don't agree. He said, we're not going to give my son chicken soup. He said, let him die, but we're not going to give him chicken soup. Anyway, he got better. It's just silly ideas. Even today, people think, there's a large swath of the American public that thinks that chicken soup is good for your health. When was it ever good to boil a dead body and drink the water? Was there any time, any place where you boil a dead body and you drink the water and it's supposed to be good for you? No, this is ridiculous. So the real disease is forgetfulness of Krishna. So if one does not treat this ailment, but instead shows insincere and shallow concern for the patients, one might give them some momentary relief and pleasure, but ultimately such a course of action cannot cure them permanently. If the patient goes for proper medicine and diet, but is instead administered bad medicine and diet, then he is certainly in the jaws of death. The jaws of death refers to the bite of a shark. Shark comes out of nowhere and bites you. It's called the jaws of death. Shark have so many sharp teeth, so as soon as it grabs you, it's like the jaw mark, the teeth marks of the jaw of a shark is devastating on the body. So forgetfulness of Krishna is human society's real and original disease. The remnants of food offered to the Supreme Lord, called prasadam, is the best diet for all patients. And to discuss and hear topics glorifying the Supreme Lord, to see the Lord's deity form and offer worship to him, and to completely surrender oneself to the Lord, these constitute the greatest medicine, the panacea. So here we have an interesting point. There are many people in the United States and in India who will all open a temple, show the deity, but their goal is not to heal the ultimate disease, forgetfulness of Krishna. Their goal is to make money, because they know that it's a natural instinct for a good Hindu to come to a temple and give some donation. So, simply showing the deity to make money is a travesty. But actually worshiping the deity with love and devotion, with the purpose of helping humanity overcome the fundamental disease of forgetfulness of Krishna, and then having plenty of Mahaprasadam for the people, free. That is a panacea. Panacea means a cure-all. These activities are the only secure way to prosperity, whereas other activities will wreak disaster. The practices of devotional service to the Lord can never cause harm to society. Rather, they can only usher in an age of opportunities and benedictions. Those who are opportunists and financial speculators should calmly consider these facts. So, usher in an age of opportunities and benedictions. Well, that's what every politician promises, isn't it? Better days are here to come. We want to Make America great again. Right? Bring the jobs back to America. Kick out the H-1B, Indians and Chinese, especially Indians. Jobs for Americans. And nowadays, a lot of Indians have become American citizens, and they know what it's like to get H-1B'd out of your job. It happens to them, too, right? All of a sudden, you see some guy from Lucknow coming in and working for $40,000 a year. It takes your $120,000 job away from you. And you suddenly, you end up voting for Trump. Yeah. Now, they're downsizing or outsourcing from Mumbai to some, Bihar or someplace like that no one would ever think of, but because the Biharis are willing to work for much less than the Mumbaisis.
Even Indian companies in the US, like a consulting company, Infosys,
Yeah.
they are hiring 10,000 Americans.
Oh, Americans.
Americans.
Oh, yeah. Well, they want to make America great. They
Stop getting
H-1B guys, yeah. Yeah. Well, by the way, multinational companies have no morals at all, whether they're American or Indian multinational companies. Absolutely no morals. They don't care. No nationalism, nothing. They don't care. It's the only. Their god is rupee, or the dollar, right? There's no more Krishna, Ram. It's just the dollar, or the rupee, or whatever. Okay, so the remnants of food offered to the Supreme Lord, Prasadam, is the best diet for all patients. And to discuss and hear topics glorifying the Supreme Lord, to see the Lord's deity form and offer worship to Him, and to completely surrender oneself to the Lord, these constitute the greatest medicine, the panacea. These activities are the only secure path to prosperity, whereas other activities will wreak disaster. The practice of devotional service to the Lord can never cause harm to society. Rather, they can only usher in an age of opportunities and benedictions. Those who are opportunists and financial speculators should calmly consider these facts. Stalwarts of society like Mahatma Gandhi tried in various ways to usher in an age of peace, but because such endeavors are not inspired or blessed by the spiritually evolved saints, they are not turning out successful, nor will they be fruitful in the future. So Prabhupada wrote this at a time when Gandhi was doing these things in the 1950s. This book was written in the 1950s. And Gandhi's efforts to get the British, let's say, we'll give him some slack there. He got the British out. It wasn't him really, it was Subhash Chandra Bose. But anyway, he got the credit for it, so that's okay. But after he took over with his political friends, they made a mess of everything. Utter mess. And the mess is still going on. So Gandhi tried in various ways to usher in an age of peace. He ushered in 3 major wars with Pakistan, right? And 1 war with China. Right? But because such endeavors are not inspired or blessed by the spiritually evolved saints, they are not turning out successful, nor will they be fruitful in the future. The god of the Monas, or Mayavadis, cannot eat, see, or hear. Okay, so this is very interesting. He says, the god of the Monas, the god of the Mayavadis. Who is the god of the Mayavadis? Yes, the Brahmajyoti. Brahmajyoti cannot hear your prayers or bring about peace, because he's a formless, personalist God. So if you pray to a formless, personalist God, can he answer your prayer? No, it's ridiculous, you see. How can God, who has no sensory organs, see the miseries of the people or hear their heartfelt prayers? If you say God is not a person, how can he hear your prayers? How can he feel, merciful? How can he feel your pain? Even Bill Clinton used to say, I feel your pain. Not that it means anything, but he used to say that, I feel your pain, But if Bill Clinton is formless and personless, then how can he feel anything? So there's no kripa in the Mayavadi philosophy, in the impersonalist philosophy. To worship such a formless God in the name of searching for spiritual truth can only produce misfortune in the world, never good fortune. In the Mayavada school of philosophy, discussions on pure knowledge can throw some light on the real nature of the absolute truth, but they are unable to fully reveal the esoteric and personal aspects of the Supreme Absolute Being. These dry empirical discussions, empirical means within the limits of the senses. So the senses are all severely limited. These dry empirical discussions fall far short of their objective, a complete understanding of the absolute truth. Therefore, only if leaders like Mahatma Gandhi strive to realize the Supreme Absolute Person, not a formless energy, can they truly benefit human society. So basically he's saying the politicians / saints, such as Gandhi, are also misleading the people. In other words, they can't bring about peace nor real prosperity in society. It might be this false artificial prosperity by which you have a few people that become very, very rich, and mass of people are basically living check to check. In the United States, about at least 47% of people in this country are living check to check. In other words, if they don't get a check 1 month, that means they're in real trouble. And they don't even have $2,000 savings in the bank. Can you imagine it? Almost a majority of the United States population doesn't even have $2,000 savings in the bank. Serious situation. In the Mayavada school of philosophy, discussions on pure knowledge can throw some light on the real nature of the Absolute Truth, but they are unable to fully reveal the esoteric and personal aspects of the Supreme Absolute Being. These dry empirical discussions fall far short of their objective, a complete understanding of the Absolute Truth. Therefore, only if leaders like Mahatma Gandhi strive to realize the Supreme Absolute Truth, not a formless energy, can they truly benefit human society. Well, Gandhi never did it. Conditioned human beings are expert at dealing with this material body and mind. These gross materialists who cannot see beyond materialistic activities find it impossible to believe that besides our material universe, a spiritual universe exists. Completely identifying with the body, such materialists are like animals, simply eating, sleeping, mating, and defending. They are so captivated by these four animalistic propensities that they lose the power to discriminate between sinful and pious activities. They tirelessly endeavor for a little sense gratification, but all their efforts end in futility. Many modern scientists have taken up the role of priests, facilitating such gross activities, which are unbeneficial and fatal. These scientists have made available a variety of products meant simply to titillate the senses. Titillate means to stimulate the senses. Titillate slightly means like tickle. It gets you sensually aroused, thus creating a deadly competitive mood among the materialists, which has in turn caused an obnoxious atmosphere in society. Yeah, whenever you agitate the senses, then you create a big competition for who will be dominant. Therefore, Prabhupada once said, all wars are wars for sense gratification. People think they become free and independent through such sensual activities, but factually, they become more tightly bound up in chains. The greater their accumulated wealth, the greater their anxiety and depravity. As much as they try to usurp the Supreme Lord's position of being the only enjoyer, that much and more are they drawn into the jaws of a horrible death. And these activities make a Herculean task out of such a simple and basic activity as sustaining the body, which needs a little nourishment only. So in other words, life becomes very complicated the more one wants to accumulate wealth and engage in all kinds of sense gratificatory activities. Okay, so we're having Archie. So we'll stop now. Thank you very much. Are there any questions anyone wants to ask? Okay, so we will continue tomorrow. Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna. Most blessed.